how we sort of motivate and build cohesion amongst our teams. So those breakout sessions will be a chance to sort of share some strategies that we've learned ourselves in our various roles. So a couple quick notes about the Community Leadership Network. One, I want to mention we've got a great web page with all of our resources. We record each one of these workshops, and we have this whole library of our previous workshops. I'm finding that that's a really helpful tool to be able to utilize and point folks to. So I want to call your attention to that. I also want to mention, as I try to at every workshop, you know, as part of our launch of the Leadership Network, we also published this fabulous Community Leadership in Action resource guide. It's really helpful. At that same webpage, you can request a printed copy of this, or of course, we have an electronic copy posted on the site as well. So really encourage you to access that. You know, this is the last workshop in this current season of workshops. We are putting together our next season of workshops, and I want to mention the next two that are coming up just for folks to be aware of. The next one is actually on March 9th, and it's going to be sort of a, you know, we held one, Paul Costello hosted a great one about a month ago on fundraising and building a budget. And this is going to be sort of a 2.0 version of that workshop, where we really think more about, in particular, how do you pursue grant funding? And, you know, for example, we think about all of these announcements about potential state funding sources, like the Better Places program and housing and all of these programs that the governor has proposed to put one-time funding for. A question for many of us is, how do you position yourself to be ready to pursue those funds, assuming you've got some alignment with the work that you're doing? So we're really going to dig into that a little bit better. Alyssa Johnson, who's relatively new on our team, will be taking the lead on that workshop. And then finally, a month from today, on March 23rd, we are going to have what I think will be a really interesting discussion around building unity during these times. How are we, you know, our democracy has been challenged over the last, well, over a period. Let's not even name the period, but we are really wanting to think together about what are we doing in Vermont to sustain civility and to build unity and connection during some pretty challenging times. So that'll be March 23rd. That one's already listed on our website, so you can sign up for that one. So let's get to the program today. You know, for the Council on Rural Development, one of the things that we do, one of our core pieces of work is that we host community conversations. And that we have done work in well over 100 towns around the state of Vermont. And we host community conversations, we bring people together. And one of the outgrowths of that work is that then local leaders step up and step into roles of leadership to carry the work forward. They chair task forces. Maybe they're a select board or a school board chair. Maybe they're leading an organization. But one of the things that we know at VCRD is just how important those leaders are doing that work in community. The ability to sort of focus your team, to keep them energized and motivated and marching towards a common goal is fundamental to so much of the work that we do in our local communities in Vermont. And so this was an instance where what we know is that's an important skill. And then what we thought is, who is really good at that work and who can help us as a group learn about that? And so I'm really excited to bring to you this group of presenters. We have today Sarah Henshaw, we have Catherine or Kitty Toll, and then we have Joe Fusco as well. And so let me just introduce, we're gonna start with Sarah. You know, I've just gotten to know Sarah in the last few weeks, but what Sarah brings is a deep wealth of experience, both internationally and here in Vermont. She lives in Lamoille County and is deeply involved in the community up there. And we're really excited. And she does this work of sort of strategic planning consulting and leadership consulting. And so we're really happy and excited to kick things off with Sarah. So I will turn it over to you to get things going.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. I am thinking about this topic I was a little humbled by the thought that I could actually motivate teams and groups, especially on virtual platforms. And I think, as all of you probably have struggled, you know, to what I would do to PowerPoints, so that they keep me on track and keep me wandering off into other. How do I do that? And what is my toolbox? So hopefully this will help motivate you think about your own toolbox and what you already bring, and then maybe during some of the conversation afterwards, share that amongst ourselves, because we all together have the power to motivate each other. Just a little bit more about me. I worked in international development for many years and had the pleasure and sometimes frustration of working with teams, both within Vermont, but also internationally, mostly in Latin America. I've worked with kind of ad hoc teams, proposal teams, grant teams, teams that I've managed as a manager, but then I've also been on boards and then brought together kind of steering committees and other groups. So hopefully through that experience, you'll get to see some different tools today. So I will, without further ado, share my screen.
And just a friendly reminder, if you don't mind muting everybody as Sarah presents, that would be great. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. So I'm starting off with just some, good practices that we all know. Kind of those moments of, reminding our teams around kind of roles and collective impact. And I like to talk about collective impact because each team and organization has a different set of rules, regulations, policies, reasons for being. But I think most teams come together around there's a collective impact that you all want to achieve or reach. And so that taking those moments to remind the team of what that looks like and what those are. One of the ways, just a reflection on one of the ways that I do that with the board that I'm on is we start each board meeting with a just quick round robin called One Thing Done. And what that does is everybody has to go around and just say one thing that they've done to further the mission. I'm sorry?
I think that just was someone chiming in.
Okay.
Yep.
The One Thing Done is just a moment for everybody to sit back and think about one thing that they've done in the past month or 2 months, depending on how long it is between meetings, to further the mission of the organization. This can be adapted to be for other teams, and just to have people sit and reflect before the meetings and before those times when you get together about why they're all there. What is it that brings them to the meeting? And the One Thing Done tool is a really great way to do that. I think another good practice is, and this is, again, it's not rocket science, validating the emotions and energy of the room, and the energy of the teams. This is kind of becoming much more important as we sit through more months of virtual meetings, and trying to figure out how do you actually gauge what's going on. And I think John used one of the really great tools, kind of those polls at the beginning, and just kind of gauging where people are, or having people do popcorn round robins. Those are good ways to do it. I put compassion as a point of entry because I'm always reminded with my teams, or people that I work with, or I'm building relationships, of my mom used to saying, you never know what's going on in somebody else's shoes. And I think sometimes we can get really caught up in what's going on in a team or a meeting and forget those just really basic things about compassion, and really trying to focus compassion, focus relationships and relationship building around compassion. The next one I just put up there is just a kind of a quick reminder, how important it is to take ownership and responsibility for mistakes that one makes. That while, as a leader, people, your actions reflect on you and as who you are and what's going on. So people will look at you differently if you really take that moment to own a mistake. And the final one is really, really, really important in COVID is making sure you as leaders take care of yourselves, right? And I'm always reminded of those, once upon a time when we all got on airplanes and there was that announcement, take care of yourself, put your mask on before putting the mask on of others. That's an important one. And so I think each leader really should take a moment and think about, what does self-care mean for themselves? Does that mean taking a walk in the woods? Does that mean spending time, reading a good book? Whatever that is, making sure that you put that into your daily schedule. And I think as leaders, and people who are somewhat more selfless, thinking about, yourself and taking care of yourself becomes really challenging at times. So those are the kind of general big picture, just reminders. Next, we'll get into some of the more, some more of the tools. So this first kind of leadership or organizational philosophy is called transformational. I was brought to this recently. Well, yeah, recently I was meeting with a group that I never met before, and one of the women who's the director of the organization talked to me about her feminine leadership style. And I was like, well, what is that? That sounds kind of funny and weird, feminine versus masculine. And she talked about it as she likes to think of herself as a leader who inspires people to step into their own leadership role. And so she follows her entire way of leading is she's very intentional about bringing others up. And so when I started to look into what another way of talking about that, or another name for that, is transformational. So these are leaders who encourage participation, looks for ways to share power and information between the team members, enhances other people's self-worth who are on your team, gets other people excited about their work. One of the big tools, there's a lot of information online about this. If you're really excited and you want to delve in, you can definitely delve in. I'm not going to delve into each one of these. But one of the really amazing tools that I found and I've used quite a bit is storytelling. And, this seems kind of hard, especially when you're results oriented and want to get something done, and especially in a crisis, let's not take time to tell the story. But I think allowing people to tell stories, and you as leader to tell stories to get points across, is really important. And one of the more amazing ways I've seen this done is doing a strategic planning process with an organization, a nonprofit here in Vermont. And I've asked the question about what has organizations learned from COVID, is one of the questions I've posed. And one of the participants told this amazing story about being able to reach into a Head Start family's home that they were never able to enter into before because of Zoom. And before this moment in the meeting, everybody in the room was like, I hate Zoom. Zoom's terrible. I can't be on Zoom anymore. This is awful. But as this woman told this story, everybody in the room started to see a completely different way of looking at this tool, Zoom, that we've all come to either love or hate. And I just saw that as a really amazing moment of why storytelling is so important to bring people together and to bring people around, different ideas. Another tool is really seeking individual participation. And this is time consuming and hard in a team, but really doing that intentional reach out to individual team members who have strengths in different areas, and really knowing your team members well enough to be able to say, look, we're looking to do a grant. And I know, Betty on our team, she's an amazing writer, and being able to reach out to that team member and validate their strength, and then request them to come into the circle a little bit further, a little bit deeper with this skill. So I think that ability to kind of seek out and understand individuals on your team and understand their strengths and be able to pull people in based on those strengths is something that this particular philosophy would put forth. The next, trying to be cognizant of time here, John, because I know you're full. This next organizational development philosophy is appreciative inquiry. This is one that I really use a lot in my work. I believe strongly in appreciative inquiry. I'll read a quote from David Cooper-Retter, who was one of the founding thinkers of appreciative inquiry. He talks about appreciative inquiry is about the search for the best in people, their organizations, and the strength-filled, opportunity-rich world around them. It's not so much a shift in the methods and models of organizational change, but a fundamental shift in the overall perspective taken throughout the entire organization. So it's not about one or two tools, but it's really about thinking about things through an appreciative lens. But obviously, it's an organizational development philosophy, so it has tools. And some of my favorites that I'm happy to talk a little bit more about at a different time, but instead of doing performance appraisals with your staff, so at that time of year when you come together and you talk about how amazing or the types of work you've done, this should be done with board members as well. This can be done with other team members, even if it's a ad hoc group, but just talking about how people performed is really important. But instead of doing it in terms of an appraisal, do it in terms of an inspiration. So having those moments be around what do people think they've done well and why? And what are those successes that people have achieved and why? And really have people delve into the why of what those successes are based on to allow people that moment to explore for themselves and as a team to explore why success and those strengths are there and how you can use those to keep building and motivating people. For strategic planning, I'm a huge proponent of SOAR, not swatting. So what does that mean? SOAR is strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. So very much based on the strengths of an organization, the aspirations and dreams of an organization, and really honing those strengths and aspirations into a results-based work plan instead of something that looks at weaknesses and threats. My experience using SOAR is one that really brings organizations together and really motivates people to not just participate in the strategic planning, but then to actually implement it afterward and be motivated. One of the tools that the SOAR process uses is called a high point interview. And while it is a strategic planning tool, it is an amazing tool to use to remotivate teams. And what it does is it matches organizational stakeholders that may not have the opportunity to talk to each other normally. So board members with staff or community partners and board members. I'm very nonprofit focused, so sorry if my examples are very nonprofit focused, but or people who benefit from services from nonprofits with staff members or with board members, people who normally might not have a relationship or a conversation, and it basically asks those two people to come together and talk about what was the best moment you've had with this organization. And each person gets 15 to 20 minutes to talk about that best moment and see how many shared values, how many shared visions you had that came out together in your experience. And if you're in a strategic planning process, that information then enters into a whole process. If it's not a strategic planning process, it can just motivate people and excite people. And you can take that information from those interviews and you can share them at meetings and sprinkle those moments of inspiration throughout meetings to motivate people of why this work is so important. We'll listen to what this group came up with when they were interviewing each other about their high moments. Those are just really great moments to motivate people. And the last thing I'd like to just say about appreciative inquiry is the whole kind of philosophical perspective of it is really to look for the roots of success of organizations and the roots of strengths of organizations, and to move away from looking for those why things are failing or why there are these barriers and what are these barriers and identifying those barriers, but looking at, okay, there might be a barrier, but what opportunity does that barrier bring? And that's sometimes easier said than done. And there, we as people like to fall back into that depreciative, mind frame, but really kind of being intentional about asking for what opportunities are there and what strengths are there really helps change people's minds. Next is looking at kind of some of the tools that learning organizations have. So learning organizations is again, an organizational development philosophy and approach is a really complicated set of different tools and systems that an organization puts together to really focus on learning and improving and pivoting and changing. There's a lot involved in that, so I'm not going to get into all of them, but there are some really important tools that you can kind of sprinkle throughout your work. Probably many of these you might already use or you might have already heard of. The first one is active listening. And it's one of those things that people say and you're like, oh yeah, I totally know what that is, but sometimes you forget. But it's that moment of actually being present when people are talking and actually responding and asking questions and digging deeper and being curious and inquisitive. And so, you know, thinking about how do you as leader actively listen and respond can help bring you back to what's going on in that moment and and what your staff is saying, and allowing staff to feel validated and appreciated. And O3 is a fancy, lovely little acronym, almost acronym, for one-on-one meetings. So these can be used between managers and staff, but it can also be between board chairs and board members, or it can be used between staff members and board members. They're regularly scheduled times for 15 to 30 minutes to check in between two people. And they, you know, usually what you do is you, as the pair, create 2 to 3 questions that you come together around. And they can be things like, what are your most recent successes? Why were those successes so important to you? What did you learn from those successes? What contributed to the successes, and what has allowed you to have that great work? So that you can create together 3 questions, you come together for 15 to 30 minutes, and then you break apart. But it's just a moment to validate and appreciate and to learn what's really going on. Because a learning organization really is focused on increasing participation between staff, peer-to-peer learning, as well as increasing participation in the change or solutions or services of an organization. A lot of the tools are really focused around that, seeking input and you know, fostering relationships between people. So another one is, you know, pulse surveys. I'm not sure how many people know what a pulse survey is, but I'm sure there's some that have used them. Quick surveys, just like John did at the beginning, to kind of check in and get information. They can also be used, and a lot of times they're used for kind of an emotional energy check-in with teams. There's a bajillion different online service users. If you were so excited, you could use Tiny Pulse. There's other ones that are out there, but you can also just do those at the beginning of each meeting or time together. The last set of tools that learning organizations really like, that I really like from them, are things around daily kudo emails or team learning newsletters that are co-written. They're not as effective if they're written from the leader, but they're really effective if you empower your staff to go out and gather kudos and really great things that the teams have been able to do. And they get those stories and then get those stories out to the team or to external stakeholders. So it's not just about you as leader, you know, doing all the work, but looking for ways to foster those relationships and empower people on your team to come together to get information out. The last thing I was just 2 more slides and I promise I'll be done. Sorry, John. The last thing I was thinking about was just shared responsibility. It's a lot of burden and time and energy to be a leader. And I've seen a couple of really amazing new trends in sharing responsibility between leaders. The first is the Lamoille Area, amazing acronym, LRASROC, the Lamoille Area Health and Human Services Regional Command Center. That's a group of health and human service organizations that came together up here in Lamoille County in response to COVID to help coordinate services and collaborate between health and service organizations to make sure that the things weren't falling through the gaps. And this organization has been going now for over a year, and it's led by 3 commanders, and they share the responsibility of coming up with priorities, motivating the team, leading the team, and making sure things move forward. And I think that shared responsibility between them has helped, at least for them, to stay involved and engaged. And their motivation to us then keeps us involved and moving forward. Another example up here in Lamoille is our United Way recently went through an executive director change. And the woman who came on board, she came on board and looked around and was like, I don't know if I'm the right person for this job by myself. And so created a co-directorship position. And so there's now 2 women in charge of the United Way up here in Lamoille County. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting and unique way to think about what leadership could and should look like. And then my last, just some thoughts about being virtual. We're always on Zoom. So what are some ways to keep our teams motivated that I've seen that are kind of cool? One is that initial meeting verbal check-in with all team members. I find just making everybody have to come off mute, say something, and come back and go back on mute at the beginning of meetings really helps people refocus their energy on, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm doing this, and I'm gonna be intentional about it. And there's a variety of different ways and tools. The best one I ever saw was a group of people who asked, can you just hold up and describe one thing that you're sitting in front of that we can't see? And that was great because everybody all of a sudden was laughing and joking, and you could actually see what's on the other side of people's screens, right? And so if it's in a group of people that you only see one side of their screen, knowing what's on the other side was kind of fun. I think it's really important to create those personal relationships, and scheduling separate times to cultivate one-on-one relationships with your team members is really important now, especially in the time of Zoom, because we're all together in these big groups looking like the Muppet Show together so much that another great tool is just fostering those kind of non-work related times on Zoom with your team. I had a great virtual treasure hunt with a team that was really fun and really fostered some team relationship building that might be good. There's this really great group called Conterra. They have an incredible amount of information about how to manage teams virtually, webinars, tip sheets. I would highly recommend going and checking out all their COVID information because there's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of really great polling tools out there. There's a lot of great whiteboard tools out there. And while they seem overwhelming to learn, once you learn them, they are incredible and really help bring teams together. And now, John, I will let you have your time back. Thank you so much. Happy to stick around and answer questions afterward.
Sarah, that was awesome. That was really a powerful overview, and so many little threads there that I think are worthy of some follow-up, right? Lots of little suggestions and pieces that that we can draw from and dig deeper into. So thank you so much. To introduce our next speaker, when you think about our state house, there are a couple of sort of nucleus, little centers of power and action. And ranking right at the top of that are the appropriations committees, the House and Senate appropriations committees. They do so much important work to set the direction of the state, and they face a huge challenge of building every legislative session, of building a budget, bringing people together. And here's, I think, one of the powerful things about Vermont is that they do that in a bipartisan way. They work across the aisle. Every member of that appropriations committee is contributing to the work. And I have to say, our next speaker, now former Representative Kitty Toll, who was the chair of that House Appropriations Committee, in a way, she made it look easy. What you knew is that there was so much intensity of work going on beneath the surface, but she just did a phenomenal job of working with that team around that committee table or that virtual committee table. If you look at the work that committee did over the last year since COVID struck, it's really phenomenal. So with that, we're really excited to have former Representative Toll to share a few tips from her work in the House Appropriations Committee and elsewhere. All right, all you.
Thank you, John. It's nice to be here, and thank you for those kind words. I also want to say in Vermont, we're so fortunate to have groups like yours, the Vermont Council on Rural Development, and so many others that bring Vermonters in to support and build our communities and make them as strong as they are. And this is not happening in other states. There's so much that happens in Vermont that other states they should be envious of us. And so thank you for your good work. And it's so nice to see so many of you and people from the kingdom. And I do have to do a quick hello to Peter Reed. It's nice to see I'm the former representative and I'm missing it terribly and wishing you the best this session. So Sarah hit on so many points and many of mine are going to be very similar. There are common themes that are going to run throughout, but I'm really going to focus on meetings, committee work, and how to make them successful. And so that's from my point of view and from what worked for me. So what worked for me may not work for everybody, but hopefully there's going to be things that you can use in some of the things that I highlight. One thing that I did notice before I talk a little bit about where I got to where I was and how it rolled out. The title, Sustaining Motivation, Purpose, God, and Group Cohesion was one of the titles for the workshop that I found today. And instantly, when I saw the word sustaining motivation, well, it's hard to have anybody on your team motivated if they're not included and they have nothing to do. I mean, that was just something that came to my head. People have to be included and they have to have something to do. The purpose, there should never be any confusion about what your purpose is. That needs to be clear. And the last piece was group cohesion. And usually a team approach is much more successful if there's a predetermined end and the decisions have already been made and you're wasting people's time. There's no cohesion to the group. And so I could basically just stop talking right now by defining those three topics. But being the good politician that I am, I do have some other things to say. So first, I'm going to tell you just a bit about myself. I grew up and chose to remain and live in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, which is, as you know, a very rural section and has its challenges, but also has wonderful things happening in the kingdom, and it's a great place to live. And I participated in a lot of community work before I became a representative 12 years ago. And so very familiar with boards and organizations, but as I was sitting here listening to Sarah, I was actively engaged. I guess I was a couple board chairs, but I don't remember the leadership demands that soon came later in the legislature, but it's certainly my work in the community helped prepare for that. When I ran for the legislature, I spent my first year on the Ag Committee, and then for the last 10 years, I was on the House Appropriations Committee. But when I was on the Ag Committee, I looked at the Appropriations Committee and I feared the members and I feared the leader. And I don't mean feared in a bad way, but like they were, in my opinion, on this throne making these huge decisions and oh my God, I could never do that. And I think if somebody told me I was going to chair that committee my first year, I would have ran home and not returned. And so always leave yourself open. You never know what opportunities and challenges are going to come, but if you embrace them, you'll handle them well. On appropriations, the last 4 years, I was the chair, and it was some of the best years, some of the best experiences in my life. But what I did see when I first sat in that chair seat, and there is a seat as the chair that you sit in, which I had a hard time moving from my seat as a member to that seat, was I kept thinking, can I do this and be successful? And I learned very, very quickly before our meetings even started that I couldn't have that question about, can I do this and be successful? I had to pivot very quickly to what do I need to do to be successful? And so when you're in whatever group you're in, don't question what you can do, your strengths, your weaknesses. Ask yourself, what do I have to do? And just start moving forward. And that was a big turning point for me, because then I started looking at things differently instead of second guessing everything that I was going to be wrong and how I was going to be a huge failure. I had a very diverse group, as John talked about. We're from geographically all corners of the state. We're from different political parties, and within those parties, left-leaning, right-leaning, moderate. We were a very diverse group politically. Our personalities were completely different. Our experiences were different, and our priorities about where things were going were completely different. And so one of the charge was, how do I create a team with 11 pretty headstrong people all wanting different things? And so first I got right to the granular, the one piece, what is it that we have to do? And everyone around the table had to have the same charge, the same mission. Our charge happened to be, we weren't designing a new road or creating a new program for a school or fundraising for something. All of those would work the same way. We had to get out a state budget and we had a timeline. And that was it. We had to pass a budget and we had a timeline, and statute said we had to do it and there was no other choice. The only thing that has to pass in the legislature is the budget. Nothing else has to pass that year. So that was actually a plus. And so whatever you're working on, make sure it's very defined and make sure that you have a timeline. And sometimes you have to be a little flexible in your timeline, but set realistic benchmarks and have some flexibility where needed. You're going to have to revise along the way. So to build the team, after we had a very clear mission and a timeline, but we had to build a team. And Sarah talked about this. What I found was really important, and it needs to be sincere. Your work needs to be sincere. If you're doing it just to do it, people are going to see through that right away. But building relationships around the committee with members is so critical. You have to have respect for one another and listen to one another. And you're not going to like everything you hear and agree with priorities, but there has to be relationship building and there has to be priorities. And then as you continue your work, you have to have that work, you continue with real purpose and real integrity. And your word is the bottom line. And if you change a position, you let people know, but in whatever you're doing in any group, make sure that there's purpose and integrity runs deep. And then with all those people you're working with, either in a committee or a select board or whatever it is, everybody has value. And you need to find people's values. If you're in the leadership role, I think one of the most important missions I had to, what value does every member have and how can I use their value? I can recognize it, but if I don't use it, it doesn't mean anything. And I take those strengths and I would build upon them and delegate work, because everybody has to have ownership and fingerprints in a good way on what you're doing. If it's done by a select few, then you don't have a team. And one thing I would have done for today, if Sarah were on my team, I would have had somebody take all my notes and put them into a great PowerPoint presentation for you. But I'm in COVID, I'm stuck in an upstairs bedroom, and my kids didn't have time to do it and they're not home, and I didn't have access to legislative staff. And so I'm doing it how I know how, but delegating to people who have expertise and bringing the work back just strengthens the group. And Sarah mentioned praising and recognizing people for good work, and don't overdo it. Do it when it's deserved, because otherwise, if you're just thanking people all the time, which is very important to always thank people, but it has to always be done with sincerity. And it's a critical piece that not only is their work valued, but you appreciate it and you say, thank you. You have to acknowledge differences, whether it's an ATV policy or snow machines going across private land or in state lands. People are going to have different opinions on everything. Acknowledge and hear people's differences and what's important to them. Always know what's important to them. Be respectful if you think differently. And I would caution you, because I didn't notice it until there was so much Zoom, watch your body language, because your body language there, I didn't realize, how many times I probably rolled my eyes when I shouldn't have rolled my eyes. And I hope I didn't. But you always have to be respectful, and people know if you're listening. Put your cell phone down, don't check your emails, don't send a quick text, because emergencies happen. But if you watch, people aren't always engaged around the table. And if you're the person that has come and expressed a concern about why that ATV trail is where it's going to be, and I'm leading the meeting and I'm texting my daughter, I've lost all respect, and their testimony, their conversation means nothing. And so if you're leading a meeting and you're a member of that meeting, be engaged, be respectful, and listen, even if you don't agree. And at the end of the day, there's some mission, there's something that has to be completed, whether it's a policy or a new program or a budget or whatever it is that you're working on. There will be compromises in it. And if there's no compromises in it, ask yourself, have you really done the work? Because if it's a foregone conclusion where this is going to end before you even start a process, you've lost, I think you've lost some integrity, because you're not allowing other people's ideas and interests and voices to be part of an end product. And that's what gets people to buy in. I may not have gotten everything I want, but the committee listened, they took a piece of it, they understood my concerns, and there were no surprises at the end. And that's what I would say is one of the biggest things for me, is when a budget came to the floor of the House, if any of the 150 members were surprised by what was in that budget, we didn't do our work. You communicate, you listen, you get the information out, and you do it again and again and again. They may not like it, but they won't be surprised. Don't surprise people. The next thing I was going to move to very quickly, and I'll be fast because I know time, you have to set agendas and you have time limits. Engage the public. It's a critical piece. Be transparent, make sure it's meaningful engagement. Make sure that people, don't say, well, why should I even bother? We know where it's going to end up. You shouldn't know where it's going to end up. The public and the members and the work around the committee should all be part of a process, and there should be a decision made at the end that reflects as many points of view as you can. And when you engage the public, and Sarah mentioned this, listen, and listen again, really listen and be engaged, and speak to people and have a human side to you instead of just being a board or a group. And walking through the legislature, and whether you're walking into a meeting to sit at the chair of the board table, say hello to people when you walk in and mean it. Just don't go in and start the meeting and not have a personality. And I do have to tell this quick story, and Sarah talked about storytelling, but very quickly, walking through the State House, you say hello to people all the time. And it was such an important thing to do. And I only did it because Representative Juskowitz called me on it one day. He said, Kitty, you're always in such a hurry. You never stop to ask, when I say, how are you? We need to have a conversation. And he really called me on it. And I noticed I was always in a rush. And I slowed down and I started to make those connections with people, and they were sincere and it was important. And I was in New York City visiting my daughter, and it was a Sunday morning, and it was really quiet on the streets. And every now and then I'd walk by somebody and I'd say, good morning. And they looked at me like I had 3 heads, but I didn't stop doing it because they looked at me funny, but I think they liked it. And I think it's important to say hello and good morning and be sincere. And then just at the end, your meetings, make sure that you have a clear agenda, you have a clear plan, expectations are set out, that they're timely, and always do a recap. I found at the end of a meeting, doing a recap was really important so there were no loose ends. So, if Stephen needed to answer somebody's question, in a public hearing about a tax provision, that, Stephen, when you have that question to answer, when will you get it back, and make sure it's directed to the person who asked the question, or preparations for the next meeting, who is doing what, and that tasks are very, very clear, and no one's time is being wasted, and there's no loose ends at the end of a meeting. And don't let your meetings drag on. If you want to lose interest, drag on a meeting and no one's going to want to attend. Church council meetings are oh my God, they're awful. And just don't let them drag on. And so just to wrap up, in the end, be known for someone who's fair and inclusive. I think that's really important. Someone who listens and cares. Make sure that you have a really good end product, whether, whatever the goal is or the mission is, that there's no surprises, that there's lots of voices, there's lots of fingerprints in the final product that people can be proud of. Not everyone's going to be happy, but everybody should understand how you got to where you did. And they shouldn't be surprised, but at least, they can say, it's not what I wanted, but it was a fair and it was a good process. And do your work with a sense of humor. If you take yourself too seriously, sometimes you lose a lot of people along the way. A sense of humor and a smile goes a long way. And I think I will wrap it up there, John.
Again, there is a lot to think about from that. That was wonderful. Really appreciate that. I'm actually going to turn the microphone over to our executive director, Paul Costello, who's going to introduce our next and final speaker. Speaking of timeliness, we're going to go a little past 11, and I think that's okay. If you have to jump off, that's okay. But I think it's worth it. There's a lot of great presentation here. So Paul, take it away. Oh, Paul, you're muted.
You're muted is the Time Magazine phrase of the year, I think. Really wonderful to hear Kitty, who has been such an incredible stateswoman for Vermont. And thank you, Kitty, for all you've done for the people of Vermont and your leadership in the legislature and especially in appropriations these last years. It's an honor to introduce Joe. I met Joe back in 2004 when we were working on the creative economy, how the arts and culture can help to drive opportunities for the future of Vermont and especially for our downtowns. And you think, why would you get involved with the largest waste company in Vermont and New England maybe around the creative economy? And it's because creativity is everywhere. And Joe is this fascinating creative leader. He described to me sessions at Casella's with their middle management team from 20 different states, where they sit in a room and he asks them to think about every single thing that they're doing that might be patentable. So like, what is the creative edge of our work? And then he would go into a room with a group of people like that, and he would say, let's draw up a work plan for next year that has nothing in it that we do now. So Joe is like a guy who helps to frame boxes, but he also gets out of them. And he's been a key leader in Vermont's thinking around climate, around the way businesses can be problem solvers and how that can be a huge market niche for the future of Vermont. And a great partner to VCRD. He was a board member for 12 years. And so it's a great honor to introduce our friend Joe Fusco.
Thank you, Paul. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. One of the great things about speaking after smart people like Sarah and Kitty is that there's very little expectation that I would say anything very useful at this point. But I will be brief because I'm going to start from the position that everybody on this call already knows what a great team looks like, already knows what the values of a great team are, what a great culture is required to have a great team. We already have all these instincts. You don't need me to tell you. When I first met my wife, she was very fond of telling me that love is not a feeling, love is a behavior. And this is one of the central kind of challenges of leadership or anybody trying to become a great leader. How do I close that gap between my feelings, between my intentions, and my actual behaviors? right? So when we think about what makes a great team, we all have these great instincts, we all have these great intentions, but the real hard work is translating that into actual behavior that results in great outcomes, great impacts for people solving problems. So what I'm going to share with you today is the result of 35 years of me messing up and a little and succeeding a little, but even better, getting paid to watch other people mess up and other people to succeed. And so what we've learned, here's what we've learned basically, is that great teams have very distinct impacts, outcomes, but even more importantly, very distinct behaviors. So what I'm going to share with you today are a series of questions that really are meant to drive your thinking. It's not me giving you the answers, but you being driven to think about how can this team have better outcomes, better impacts. So what I've organized this idea into, I've distilled my observations of working with great teams over 35 years, is 6 basic questions that I hope will motivate and move you to want to build cohesion and purpose and motivation for your teams, right? Driving that behavior and that impact. So the first question we often ask a great team is, we say, is this team a place where everyone can succeed and shine and achieve? Is it a place where we learn, where we grow, and we expand our comfort zones? And what you're basically doing here is appealing to that human need to achieve. Everybody wants to be the best version of themselves every day in every kind of work that they're doing. They're attracted to teams that give them that opportunity to be the best version of themselves, right? So the key word there is this a place where we achieve, where we get things done, where we succeed? The best, most talented people are attracted to those kinds of places. The next question is this team a place where everyone's contribution is important and valued, where everyone is respected, treated fairly and with dignity, right? So the key word here is respect. Basic human need, do I matter? Am I valued? Right? And so we know even how much more important this is becoming when we want to seek diversity and inclusion in our teams, right? Because the great leaders understand that great ideas come from many different places, from people with many different backgrounds, many different experiences, many different perspectives. Okay, so a great leader says this team needs to be a place where we make sure everyone feels valued. A version of this has been already said by either Sarah or Kitty, right? But this is kind of the distillation of that idea. Everybody wants to be respected. Again, not rocket science, as Sarah said, not rocket science, but something we really need to deliberately close that gap between our understanding of that idea and then our behaviors around that. The next question that I ask leaders to kind of think about, meditate on, is your team a place where everyone shapes or contributes to the work that you're doing? Is it a place where we're very clear of our expectations of each other? Human beings love to have agency. They love to have a form of control over the work that they're doing. So giving people that place, and I think Kitty said it earlier, is people perform better when they actually have something of meaning to do, right? Give them control over the work, involve, share. The cliche is typically empower people to do the work that you want them to do. Next, is this team a place where everyone feels safe? And is it a peaceful, stable work environment? And this is really crucial, is this a safe place to give and receive feedback, to take a risk, to make a mistake, or more importantly, to voice a minority opinion? You are shooting yourself in the foot as a leader if you make people afraid to give you feedback or afraid to share an idea that might not be popular, right? So a great leader says, how do we get the most out of people? One of those ways is to create an environment that is safe to speak up, to participate, to make a mistake, right? Or to share an unpopular opinion. The fifth question is this a team, a place where everyone is cared about and cared for, where we listen to each other and assume the best about each other? People want to feel a part of something. The human driver here, the deep human need, is to be loved and to love and to be cared for, right? So great teams are places where people feel like they're part of something larger than themselves. They're cared about. The behavior here is often, do you listen to them? Right? A great behavior, being a great listener tells people you care about them and that you want them to participate and contribute. And then lastly, is this team a fun place to work? Is it a place where people are creative, innovative, free to experiment? Great human need for freedom and fun in the workplace and on teams. And so the best teams in the world, and the place that really good talent is attracted to, is a place where it is fun. It is fun to play with ideas. This was my great pleasure being on the board of VCRD for 12 years. It was a great place to spend once a month with great smart people, thinking outside the box, having fun, being creative about how we could address some of the problems that are facing Vermont and Vermonters. So you want to have that team where you obviously are having a lot of fun and a lot of creativity. I know I move fast. I'm going to put these questions in the chat if you don't mind, John. But here's these 6 questions really are, I'm going to challenge you not only to ask them of yourself as a leader of a team, but go back to your team, gather together, and ask these 6 questions. Do you truly feel like this is a place where we can shine and succeed, where we care about each other, where we respect and want to include diverse opinions, where we have fun, where we create and are innovative? Because people will tell you whether that's the actual impact or not. It is not enough to have the intention. It is not enough to have the instinct or the feeling, but really work on how we translate this into behaviors. It all comes down to this. Are people choosing you? Great leadership is the art of getting people to choose you as a person, to choose your team, to choose your board, to choose your organization, whether that be stakeholders, philanthropists, talented people who you're trying to hire. Make people want to choose you. People choose and are attracted to workplaces that meet the criteria in these 6 questions. So good luck. That's the 8-minute version of how to be a great leader. It's really just about getting you to think and solve your own problem here. And I'm going to put these questions in the chat in a minute. And then I'll also put my contact information in there because I love to talk to people. And if you ever have any questions, give me a shout. And back over to you, John.
Joe, that's excellent, really, and amazingly efficient. Like those 6 questions, you know, not to call her out, but my wife happens to be on this workshop right now, and I got a little chat from her. You mentioned that love is not a feeling, but a behavior, and I get this little chat from Rebecca saying, you listening to this, buddy? So really appreciate the framing of those 6 questions. Excellent fuel.
I tried to go fast because I know if people had to drop off at 11 o'clock, perhaps they would want to drop off once I started talking. So,
you know, I see, I'm looking at the chat and I see one, oh no, well, I think here's what we want to do. I want to honor our schedule. And first of all, I know that folks are going to drop off as needed, but really want to sort of give permission for those who are not interested in sticking around for a small group conversation to feel free to jump off. But I think what I'd like to do is shift over to those small group conversations because again, we find that for those who participate, that the ability to connect, get to know one another, and reflect in a smaller group rather than in this larger Zoom room is worthwhile for those who are interested. But we really understand if you've got other things you've got to get to. So I'm gonna transition, And here is what we are thinking of in terms of how to structure those conversations. First of all, go around the small group and introduce yourself quickly. Your challenge is to do this quickly. Just let people know who you are and what you do in a couple of sentences, not a couple of minutes. And then the second question for you all, and I'll send these to you all as a message into the breakouts. But a second question is really to share from your own experience. What tips and advice do you have for one another that you want to share, reflecting on some of what we just heard together? How might you add to that and refine that from your own experience? And then finally, if there's time, we're going to go until about 11:25. So we have about 20 minutes for these breakout conversations. If there's time, I would encourage you to think about what are some of the challenges you're facing as you do this work, and ask questions of the group to help you think through what challenges you face in leading the teams that you're leading and in doing the work that you're doing. You know, I say this a lot, but one of our goals in these conversations is to get other people talking. That's your mission. Ask some questions, be curious about the work that others are doing, and see if you can get folks talking in your breakout group. So I'm going to encourage those. Nick has the challenge of like getting our breakout groups assembled. So I'm looking at him, but I'm going to encourage those who don't want to stick around to hop off. And then we're going to go into small groups of 5 for those breakout conversations. Nick, are you? And actually, before we do that, I should have done this. I'm in such a race here. Huge thank you to Sarah, to Representative Toll, to Joe Fusco for their presentations. Really, yes, big round of applause. Like, there was so much good fodder, and this will be something that I think people will refer back to regularly, because there was just so much good material there. So thank you all for joining us and helping us think about this important topic. All right, Nick, I'm looking to you.
I think we're ready. Yeah, I'd encourage anybody, any last minute hoppers off, to go ahead and hop off. But we should be set to be in groups of 4 or 5. So you should get an invitation right this instant. If you just click join breakout room right now.